your grant for kind of you.
It's sharing.
The big, yeah.
But it's sharing.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, but so when you go to your,
Oh, just curious.
They don't see that.
It was exciting to hear.
they'll see that, but when you go to like that, now they see that.
Now they see that. Okay.
I was at the college meeting, remember?
All right.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
Right.
they take forever.
Did you hit record?
I did.
Okay, so we're recording all of
Thanks,
this.
Rob.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and get started, even though we recorded some of our chit chat here. We are very happy to see everybody back, and today we are having Dr. AJ Ramirez from Women and Gender Studies talking about exploring LGBTQ membership in Methodist Church using mixed methods. We're very excited to have you here today, so we will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I just tried to center myself. Well, good afternoon for the whole one or two people that are on. So I was texting a text here this morning. This isn't like exciting information unless this is your thing. I have recently, just to give a background information, I've always been fascinated with faith, specifically Judeo-Christian type of religions with LGBTQ membership and how that works. Because, you know, as you know, through the years, there's been a struggle and there's been other denominations who have battled with this. You know, do we ordain LGBTQ clergy? Do we even allow LGBTQ leadership? And for some, do we even allow LGBTQ membership into the congregations? And so there's so many rules depending on the denomination and how you're connected with it. But for me specifically, United Methodist was a specific denomination that spoke to me, not just because I've been a member of the United Methodist Church for several years, but because the foundation of the United Methodist Church goes back to John Wesley, and his teachings throughout time have always been revolved around inclusivity, advocacy work, kind of speaking out against those in positions of power, going against the status quo. And some of the trends we have seen with the UMC, especially with the civil rights movement, even the abolitionist movement back in the mid-1800s, was the Methodists were very much involved and even continued to split as a result of racial issues. Different members saw it differently, women's rights and civil rights. So I do know in 1956, United Methodist Church officially ordained women as clergy, and there was a split with that because people didn't agree. And then here we are again today, 2022. The LGBTQ debate in the United Methodist Church has been going on probably for at least 20 or 30 years at a minimum. And reconciling United Methodist, which you can see here on your screen, there's a little rainbow flame at the top left-hand corner. I'll scroll up to the top so you can kind of just see the banner of what it is. Reconciling Ministry Network started in 1980 and it was quite small, and it has grown significantly probably in the last 20 years as a result of LGBTQ advocacy in the church. Now it has grown to the point where the denomination has recently kind of what I call a divorce. As of May 1st, you have the Global Methodist Church that will now be the Traditionalists who are moving on, and then you have United Methodist Church that we are hoping and praying in 2024 at General Conference they will do away with the homosexuality clause out of the Book of Discipline. So me and a fellow researcher from Georgia Southern, Dr. Nancy Malcolm, who's listed on this is kind of one of our this is pre-publication. This is just kind of the Ministry Network wanted to see our results so they could start sharing it to build motivation of why LGBTQ folks were actually staying in the denomination. So we kind of release this information, what data we have so far, but it's a work in progress. So we wanted to ask the question, why are people staying? We know why people are leaving. You know, we understand why they're leaving the denomination. But we wanted to know why they were staying, because honestly, it's exhausting. I mean, it is emotionally and spiritually exhausting for allies, for members of the actual community, LGBTQ folks. And a lot of them were just, you know, I know from I was raised in the church. It was important to me. You know, we have some inclusive denominations already, like the Episcopalians in the United States. They've given their local branches the option, right, to perform same-sex marriages or not. We have 2 inclusive Episcopalian churches here in Valdosta, St. Barnabas and Christ the King. But they're very formal, and some people like a little more, how should I say, I don't want to use evangelical because that word is so loaded now, but more charismatic perhaps. And the Methodist, along with very similar to the Baptist Association, offers contemporary worship services as well as traditional. And so we started to we did this huge sample with the help of RMN. They're global actually, but we wanted to keep it in the United States within all the conferences. And we sent out a survey through Qualtrics. We did a very simple survey, and we sent it out with with questions of just basic demographics, your race, your sexual orientation, your age, and we also wanted to know what conference you were from, just so we kind of understand. And if you were a member of the UMC, and if you were, it would keep you into the survey. If you weren't, it would respectfully discharge you out, because we just wanted to know membership folks. And then we also had a question there if you were clergy or not, because we kind of wanted to know of the lay folks, why were they staying? And clergy, we definitely wanted to know why they were staying, right? Was it more because I put in all my work into seminary, and why get rid of all that, half of my life? So we sent this out all over the nation. Just send it all the way out. Let me go ahead and show you the methodology here. So a recent survey of LGBTQ plus affirming United Methodist provides a glimpse into the decisions being made by lay members and clergy as they navigate the controversy within the denomination over inclusion of LGBTQ individuals. It was surveyed in the United States based on current and former United Methodists who support inclusion of LGBTQ plus individuals. Researchers asked participants why they stay in a denomination that has been hostile to the LGBTQ community, whether they have considered leaving, that was one of our questions, and for those who had already made the decision to leave, whether they would consider returning. Okay, so we had over 1,400 responses from our surveys, and that was after we kind of cleaned it up. And then 50% respondents attended fully inclusive and affirming congregations, and about 33% attended centrist or mostly non-inclusive congregations. So when we're talking about fully inclusive, their congregations are totally chill with LGBTQ. They're staying in the UMC. They're going to continue to do gay membership and leadership regardless of what happens. The 33% of people who said they were staying, this was the number we were really interested in, because they're in churches that are like traditional or kind of in the middle of the road. And this was kind of the percentage we're like, oh gosh, man, you guys are getting it rough. Why stay, right? Some of the things that we found super unique was we're thinking young people would be the biggest group, like 40 and under. We were thinking like that's going to be the age group that is going to be all fired up. No, the median age was 65 years old. Wow. 60, and look at that, 95% were white. I'm just like, get out. And I was talking to my co-researcher, Nancy, about this, and we were just blown away. Like, we couldn't believe it was mainly older, retired white folks who were allies in this movement. And that was the other thing. Only 25% were LGBTQ+. 75% of the respondents were identified as straight. Straight, white, 65-year-olds. I know, I keep saying this, but I'm blown away. It's just giving me hope, people. It's giving me hope. We mainly had women, right? So 2 to 1, we kind of expected that. Women tend to be more accepting. 4% of the recipients of the survey were transgender. 70% were lay, right? So member, just non-clergy. And then we had 13% active clergy, and then we had 9% retired clergy. So, when I looked at this, I'm thinking, that's not bad. That was very interesting, kind of to see all that. So that was the quantitative part of the research. The qualitative part was we asked folks in the survey, if you would like to interview, please, check this box, and it kind of moved you to another spot where you could send us your contact information. And we were not expecting over 200 responses, but we got over 200 people who wanted to be interviewed nationwide. Yes, we had originally says, what, I'll do 25, we get 50, that's great, we're like super excited. So we got over 200 responses, and that's why it's not done. Because I think we're on 71 interviews now. And so we are still working through that, and we're trying to get a good sample from every conference, to try to get a good scope of where the church is nationally. So many respondents note that they remain United Methodist because of family tradition and a personal sense of belonging. These responses illustrate they also appreciate all the good that the UMC has done, and they hold out hope for the future church that embraces inclusivity. And these are some of the people we have already interviewed. These are some of the responses. So a layperson from Florida said, I am a cradle Methodist, which means they were born into the church. I am a cradle Methodist and have seen the possibilities for good in the world that is done by disciples affirmed and nurtured in the UMC. And I still have hope we can be a place for everyone to be nurtured and affirmed. I mean, I literally was getting teary in some of these responses. This is a retired clergy from Minnesota. I found God in Christ in the UMC. I am not ready to leave now. I believe the UMC does much good work. And then California, the Pacific area, lay folk, I stay so long as there is hope. My devotion to the UMC does not outweigh my conviction that queer Christians deserve a fully affirming church home. Again, white, majority, 94% white, 65 and up, saying these things. I mean, like I said.
If I can break in,
yes.
When did you do this survey?
We started this survey we released it in February. And we had hoped to leave it open for a while, but because we got over 1,400 responses, we had to close it in the second week of March. It was only open for maybe a month.
Wow.
And we had to shut it down just because it was too much.
Was this year?
Yeah, it was this year, right?
Wow.
And the church split on May 1st, so we started before the split.
So AJ, about the demographic information, like the 65 years old and stuff, that's of the people, of the 1,400 who took the survey? Really interesting.
It doesn't surprise me though, but I'm old.
It doesn't surprise you, okay.
Think about who the 65-year-olds are.
The hippies.
The hippies.
Yeah, I know.
We were the 60s kids.
I know, I
you
get
know?
it. You guys fought during the,
We
I
were
know,
the
y'all
60s
marched.
kids, so that doesn't surprise
That's a good
me.
point.
So to take the survey again, remind me, AJ, what was the criteria to take it? So do you have to be supportive of LGBTQ in the
Right,
church? That's
right. So the question was, why are you staying? So it was only targeted towards folks that were staying based on this specific reason, human sexuality.
Okay,
We knew that a split was coming. We just didn't know it was happening May 1st.
yeah.
So we wanted to go ahead and know, with no end date, we wanted to know, why are you still staying? Because as of now, the church is going to stay traditional.
Yeah.
But you either identify as gay, and I'm gonna tell you, a lot of these folks have a son, a grandchild, they have somebody, a sister who's come out,
Yeah.
and it has changed. And we're kind of getting those in the interviews that are outside of the questions, as they're giving us more background information. They're actually talking about their evolution in this process. How I had one gentleman who was retired clergy from the Georgia conference tell me that he was very much opposed to it when he started. He went through seminary, very traditional Asbury, which is a very, very traditional seminary in Kentucky, and said that he met people along the way at local bars when they would go out. And he met several gay folks who were very good people, became some of his best friends. And he said, I started to listen to them. And then I started to look at what I was being taught, and I matched it up. And it didn't make sense to me. And so when he left seminary, he made the decision to be an advocate for social justice as a clergy member, as a white guy. I was like, oh God, I love you. So,
Oh, wait, I have another question.
yeah.
Just point of clarification. When talking about inclusion of LGBT, are there levels? Like, does this mean, clergy marrying, or is it
Yes.
just like a policy of accepting people's personal lives? Like what?
So, very good question. I'm sorry I didn't cover that. So the first thing, membership of LGBTQ in the United Methodist Church is already established. Anybody, all are welcome to the table. You can take communion, you can become a member, that's fine. You cannot, however, be ordained as a clergy member as a licensed pastor, which is appointed by the bishop, and clergy in the church cannot marry same-sex couples. Those are the 3 forbiddens. So the move here is inclusivity is now going to include the ordaining of LGBTQ plus and the permission now to include them in marriage ceremonies where clergy folks are not being defrauded. That's the word they use when you lose your call.
Right. So membership was always allowed.
I don't know if it was always allowed, but it is allowed as far as I know.
Okay.
Like
So
it's allowed
to
now.
all this, it's allowed.
Yes,
Okay.
it's allowed. To be gay and to be a member, I'm a member of the United Methodist Church and openly gay, and my membership has not been revoked.
And that it's been that way for years for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the only question now is why are we not marrying our LGBTQ couples? They have to go somewhere else to get married.
Right.
And why are we not allowing LGBTQ pastors to lead congregations?
Yeah.
And the Book of Discipline in the Methodist Church says that homosexuality is inconsistent with Scripture, with Christian teaching. And so this is the verse in the Book of Discipline that prevents the ordination of the clergy. So we've had several. I mean, there are gay pastors out there. They're just in the closet. The ones who have come out have gone before what we call this, judicial council. It's very similar to, Supreme Court and things like that, where they have to kind of plead their case and present it, and it's a humiliating process. Some have been removed, some have not. So we were just like wondering, we knew that this was coming. We were curious, was this going to go the same way as it did 60 years ago when women being ordained, because there was a similar fight as well? And how are they going to reconcile it? So we're doing these interviews and we're finding out all this wonderful information. We found a couple of themes as we're reading through all of this. This is what we're getting into here. It says theological beliefs provide a foundation for remaining in the UMC, as indicated by these respondents who point to both specific doctrine as well as tradition that embraces differing beliefs. When I started out talking about the study, one of the things about the United Methodist Church was that John Wesley was extremely an advocate of at the time being inclusive of commoners, of the lay folks, of we are not going to have to go through a structured system to get permission to be able to worship and serve God. And so this was one of the themes as to why Methodists split over slavery, because proponents who looked at John Wesley says slavery is wrong. We should not be doing it. They are children, they are beloved children of God. Over the ordination of women, they said that there is no difference between male and female. We embrace all of these folks. John Wesley would have supported all folks as disciples of Christ. So they split over that and then ended up UMC ordaining women. So now we're here again, and John Wesley's coming up with some of our interviewees. So here's a retired clergy member from the New England area. I believe that one of the basic theological beliefs that John Wesley preached was that God's grace was available to all persons. I still hope and believe that the UMC can continue to live out that belief and include all persons who love God and neighbor and want to be a part of our church. Clergy from Washington, Baltimore, Washington area, I believe in Wesleyan doctrine and our concept of grace. I like that there is room for personal beliefs that may or may not differ. And this is a lay person in West Ohio. Wesley's theology is deeply ingrained in me. The personal piety and the social justice emphasis are important to me. I appreciate the diversity of theology in the churches where I've belonged over the years. Whenever I moved, I sought a United Methodist Church and have found them to challenge my faith and support me personally. So we're seeing this theme of Wesleyan tradition, theology, social justice, advocacy work, inclusivity, and we're thinking, maybe this is why they're staying. Mm-hmm. They're holding out on the foundation of the denomination itself. Other people, now this is something I said, loyalty to queer family members and friends. So some of the folks in the interviewing, and again, this is all of our qualitative information, had my daughter, who is a gay clergy, stays, I stay. Okay, they're staying for family reasons. There will always be queer kids, and they need people who are willing to fight for them. I'm gonna tell you, when this one was stated, my heart melted. The fact that this individual is staying in a position as a clergy person for the queer kids. Like using their platform to say, I've got to stay, because if I leave, what happens to these kids? The suicide rate continues to rise, because we know suicide is what? Very, very high with our veterans and with our queer community. Retired clergy in Western North Carolina, it is the avenue through which I can best make an impact for peace and justice causes in both church and larger society. This is beautiful. I'm sorry, it's just giving me so much hope in the church. And so sometimes it's hard to fathom the disconnect between my beliefs, my local churches and conference beliefs, and the official written policy in the Book of Discipline. But I remind myself that change requires people working from within the system. And I have privileges that I can use for that purpose. And then that connects with me with that 95% white and 65. They know the church in and out. They have the privilege of being white. Many of them have the privilege of being straight, and they're staying to be advocates. I mean, I would have never guessed this had we not started to do the qualitative portion of this piece with the interviews and getting to know these participants of where they were nationwide. And these are all over. This is California, this is North Carolina, and this is North Georgia. And then we asked, have you considered leaving the UMC? So, you know, from some inclusive-minded United Methodists, there was a simple answer to this question. No, they have not. They will always be a part. A few explained that they have not considered leaving because they believe that the UMC will become an inclusive church in the future. So these folks were really holding out that God is not done with us yet. I thought that was very interesting. And just very devout folks in their faith. Even as the majority of respondents indicate they plan to remain, most concede that they have considered the possibility of leaving, and many have concluded that it is more important to stay and work for change. Even so, they struggle with the decision. So this person in Western North Carolina, I have considered leaving, particularly after the 2019 General Conference. I don't know how I will feel going forward. When I think of leaving, I stop myself and say, that's your privilege speaking. Suck it up and keep up the fight. As the mom of an adult member of the LGBTQ plus community, I sometimes feel like a hypocrite. How can I both love and fully support and celebrate my kid and stay and support a church that not only rejects full acceptance of them, but perpetually harms good people? I mean, they were just, you guys have done interviews as researchers. They just tore up. I mean, these are real life, this is humanity at its best for me. The privilege of being a researcher. If y'all are out there, do qualitative work, because it is a privilege as a person on the other end, as the researcher, to have the honor to listen to these individuals share the deepest, darkest secrets of their lives, to open up and trust you enough in a safe place to share valuable information that you can use to make a difference in the world, whatever you're doing as far as your research to change things. So, inspiring piece of, this has been inspiring piece of work for me. For this family, the question of whether to remain in the UMC is a matter of integrity and concern for the message that they are giving their child. So then we have this message of family, like Methodists identify as Christian. Christian has a huge emphasis on family. And so this individual is saying, yes, my husband and I both have considered leaving and continue to discuss. We have a 12-year-old who is asking why we belong to a faith that discriminates. We can't belong to a church that does. You know, then you have to have those hard conversations with your kid. I mean, the church says we should be accepting, but yet it's not, right? Many have identified a clear line stating they will leave the UMC if their local congregation or their conference were to join. Okay, at the time, it was going to be called the Wesleyan Covenant Association. They changed their name to the Global Methodist Church now. So, like I said, we started this a few months before the divorce, and they've already changed, the traditionalists have already changed their name as a result of when we were conducting the preliminary results here. Or if full inclusion were to become impossible. So some of them said, look, you know, I'm a 5th generation UN clergy. It's in my blood, but I would leave the denomination if the conference were to go to Wesleyan Covenant or the GMC. So some of these folks are like saying, look, if this doesn't change, we're done. we're done. We're not going to stay with a. So have you already left the UMC? Of the 1,225 respondents that we ended up actually keeping, because of the 1,400 plus, some of them, you know how it goes. Some of them, you have to clean it up. It was, some of them didn't finish, or some of them kind of squeezed in there. We're like, oh yeah, I'm not a member, I just lied. 91, approximately 7% indicated that they had already left the denomination, so 7%. Some left for reasons not related to the LGBTQ inclusion, such as relocation, but most indicated that controversy played a role in their decision to leave. A few belonged to the progressive congregations that voted to leave the denomination, but most indicated they had made an individual decision. Not surprisingly, even though only 1/4 of all survey respondents identified as LGBTQ+, more than 40% of those who have already left the church identified as gay, lesbian, or queer. So this is just more stuff. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that even through the research, we had questions that we specifically asked. But as you do qualitative work, like you get your quantitative stuff, you know what you're dealing with going in as far as the facts. Like you have this many women, this many men, this many non-binary. But then when you get in, you ask for questions, but then you start to find these themes that you weren't even expecting to find. So two big things that we have found in the interviews we've continued to do is that some clergy are doing same-sex weddings. And so now we're like, okay, that's a chapter in a book. And then, you know, we're finding that some consider themselves activists. Well, that's a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you get into this and you have this one, you know, thesis statement. You know, why are they staying? And then you find all of this beautiful enrichment information. It's just, I like it. It's just fun. Some who have left the UMC have found new homes and inclusive affirming denominations, and they are unlikely to return. So some have just left completely. Presbyterian USA, some have gone to UCC Church, United Church of Christ, who's very inclusive. Some have gone to the Episcopalian churches that are inclusive as well. At the same time, most of these individuals make clear that LGBTQ+ inclusion and affirmation is a necessary precondition for their return. When asked if anything would persuade them to return, they answer removal of anti-inclusive policies in the Book of Discipline, full support of welcome and inclusion of all, and full inclusion of LGBTQ. I mean, these people are like, they're not playing. And then I just kind of wonder too, some of them said in their interviews that they were not, some of them were not as vocal in their local churches about their beliefs on this. Because if they were in a traditional or centrist church, they were fearful of some repercussions, you know? And so some of them were able to speak very freely in this because it's anonymous, just, you know, but it was unique that, you know, thinking even in politics today, right, or any conversation we have, how many people are quiet, right? You know, so another thing would be fear of repercussion, right? How many people do we have who are holding out because, you know, we have more support than we realize, but, you know, they're not going to come out and say it. I miss the church. There was no question that I would jump right back in if I could find a non-abusive corner. I mean, that just pains me. Mm-hmm. That just pains me to hear someone in a church saying, I need to find a non-abusive, just a corner. I mean, people in church should not be saying these types of things. This should not be what they're feeling. Okay, yeah, and then that's just, yeah, me and Nancy. Any questions?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Have you looked, okay, a little bit of background. So I was given a scholarship to a Methodist college, and that's where I got my degree. After I got my PhD, I went back to that college and taught for about 15 years. I'm not Methodist nor am I Christian, but I just never brought that up. So during this time, the history of it was that the Methodist Church left alone all the institutions of higher education. In other words, we had absolute freedom to teach whatever we wanted to teach in the Methodist school until about the middle of the 80s. And at that point, there was a group called the Good News group that began to come up in the Methodist
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that these are
This is
the results of that.
This is them. This is them.
Before then, the Methodist Church was incredibly attuned to radical. There's, up in Kansas City, there was and it may still be there, it's been so long and I can't think of the name of it. The seminary we used to send our more radical students to was in Kansas City. And I mean, they were frontline advocates on everything. And they were pretty intense and not unusual in the Methodist Church. About the time I left there in 2003 and came here, we had started seeing the change in
The effects of the Good News Group.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, even on campuses. So they used to, because we were in the middle of Missouri, we used to have the conferences, the big
Right.
conferences come in. And so we were a major part of all that, but it was really interesting to watch the change in the Methodist Church. And now to see that
And to
it
see
has
it,
gone
yeah.
so far to the right from where it was.
Well, in a lot of ways, I have, it's not in these interviews, we try to minimize this for the purposes of making it looks pretty, doesn't it? You like the colors?
I like the layout.
It's so rainbow.
The design is really nice.
Yeah, thank you very much, yeah. So I think what we found was that, some of the interviews are saying we feel more like a Baptist church. It's like we're morphing into more of that theology that the Baptists have, but that's not who we are as Methodists. Methodism is not, well, Methodism comes from the word methods, right? There's methods of how we do things, but those methods are designed to include collaboration at each level. And so, to hear someone say, I feel more like a Baptist, it was just kind of like, it's moved in it's not even the denomination that it was designed to.
They used to be known as the hippie church.
Right. Social
Way
justice.
back in the day. They were the ones that, in the congregation, in the Sunday services and stuff, they would bring in, at Christmas time, they would actually bring in donkeys and hay and it was supposed to be just fun.
Yeah.
And especially the group in Kansas City, I wish I remember that seminary's name. They were some of the most progressives, and they would do all kinds of crazy stuff. The God's, was it Godspell?
Yeah, Godspell.
Yeah, we used to do that in church. But there were members, though, that were going, and I can remember one woman who used to stand up and go, and all my shows were purple. Everything. In all my 93 years, I've never seen such things. And she'd stomp out but she'd come back.
She always right.
And everybody else just, they let her be. They always loved poor Martha Peace there. But they were extremely inclusive to the extreme liberal side.
Yeah. Well, and so, yeah. And so I would say that the word progressive, I think, has become a loaded term as well, because even when we are currently in the South Georgia Conference here, which is considered the most traditional conference in the nation, practically. And so even when I use the word progressive, I was at the church downtown, people will be like, oh, I have to actually travel to a church in Macon because they're progressive. So I have 2 hours to go to church on Sunday. And so the funny thing is progressive is not a bad word, right? But we're finding that language has power, and in that power comes perception, and with that perception, indoctrination, right? We're able to indoctrinate individuals coming forward that this is affiliated with non-Christian values, so to speak, when really it's quite the contrary. When we talk about the radicalism of the gospel in Christ, and I always imagine this when I'm talking with folks, Jesus asking all of these people to leave their jobs. It was like a strike or something, drop your fishing nets and join me. I mean, it's just like, whoa, how radical can you be, right? You just didn't do that in that time. And so, it just kind of getting away from the basics of what is Christianity and what does it mean, and why are we spending so much time on something that we already know is not, we know homosexuality is not even in the Greek text, and then the interpretation of it in the Hebrew text, right, is very different.
Yeah.
So we know that in Judaism, right, it makes sense why homosexuality would be something that the Israelites would need to be doing, because reproduction and procreation is kind of essential to that little team
Yeah,
of
but it
people.
wasn't, if you go back to the text, there was not discussion of homosexuality. The text that most Christians use, they take out of context,
Yeah, for sure.
and the Hebrew Bible wouldn't interpret them that way.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting to watch the progression. It was the church fathers that changed most of the Hebrew Bible into the Old Testament, and even changed the mode of women. And then with supersessionism, discounted everything that was Jewish.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting to look at how it changed.
Right.
The first churches that followed Jesus, they were so very different, and they didn't have any sort of doctrine.
Right.
That didn't come later.
Well,
from
and
church
even this morning, we were talking, we're like, the Old Testament, even though it's part of the Hebrew Bible, it's interpreted very different by Jews than it is by Christians. Like, we don't even look at that text. If they were to pick up our Old Testament version in the Christian Bible, they'd be like, oh, what?
The
What is
translation,
this?
the translations are problematic, and you have to go back and look at the fact that the translations, particularly in Christianity, in Judaism, translations are understood and they're discussed, and they have the much larger stuff. But in Christianity, we intentionally mistranslated things. And so you have to go back and look at the intentional mistranslations, particularly the translation to affirm the British monarchy, you know, in the King James Bible. That was the entire reason that Bible was written the way it was. And the intentional mistranslation of the Holy Spirit from what was the masculine or the feminine to the masculine, that was an intentional mistranslation, because originally every time that comes up, it's female pronoun and female. And the same with a lot of other stuff, like in Genesis, it's like, it's not, the translations don't have the right gender.
Which goes to speak how important it is to read contextually,
Yeah.
and from multiple sources. That's interesting, as we're kind of on that theology aspect of interpretation. Some of the clergy members that we interviewed actually talked about in seminary, these things are not discussed. Like, they don't, there is no, some of them would even come out and say that no, after further research, they would concur with you on many things that you're talking about with regard to homosexuality and interpretation. And I'm thinking, again, another thing, well, why is that not being disclosed to congregations? Well, because pastors have limited power under bishop rule.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can be subjugated to certain assignments that you don't necessarily want. I said, man, this reminds me of military.
It's very much like that, and a lot of the
You make a first sergeant or command sergeant major upset, that's it.
The United Methodist Church started this thing where male ministers were sent to the most prestigious, and the females and the ones that they were allowed to claim homosexuality back then, as long as they were practicing, they could be ministers. But they would put them in the most difficult assignments, or the assignments that were farthest out, and they did this to the women too. And so there was this huge change in the Methodist Church during that time, during the 80s.
And I'm glad you said that, as long as you're not practicing. To answer your question, you can be ordained as a homosexual as long as you're not in a practicing relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they would. Don't ask.
I mean, the word humiliating that you used earlier, I think is very accurate.
They actually ask you the question.
Yeah, it's despicable.
Are you an affirmed, that's what they ask you, are you an affirming homosexual? And
But
that's
do they
interesting.
ask straight people about their relationships with their sex lives?
Well, I don't know. I have no idea. However, I'm putting myself in this process as a lay minister. I have to go before the same board. They will be asking me this question possibly next spring, and I will be able to have a how should I say it, a live experience, an experiential moment where I can actually, not as a clergy, but as a lay folk. And so I'm kind of excited to kind of feel in a certain way, not completely, because I have an expectation, right? I kind of have an idea of what's going to happen. But still, what is the humiliation? What are they going to ask? I was reading an article of a lesbian pastor from 2003 who came out that she was a lesbian. She had to go through this whole judicial council trial. And they did. They straight up asked her. And they didn't just straight up ask her. They asked her to explain what activity
Oh my gosh.
represented that. And so she did it as gently as possible using the correct semantics, cunnilingus, and they published it and made sure that it stated that that was not, they knew she was, she said she was, but they wanted to further take it the next step. So I want to say that in the early 2000s when we started to see this happen, this is when the reconciling group had already been around for 23 years. They really upped their game and said enough is enough. And they just had to remobilize. I'm gonna tell you, this group, this organization, if it wasn't for them, I don't think we would have been able to do this, and I don't think we'd be where we're at right now with where the church is going as far as progressive versus traditional. So I commend them for that work. So yes, I know this is a unique talk for Brown Bag, but it's a mixed message. It does, the church is always messy. So anything that has to do with religion, as you know, professor of philosophy, religious studies, it's messy.
It's a great talk. A couple things I was thinking of. For the racism, you could have a whole other project there, right? Like, I mean, I was just like, put that one aside and save it for a while, because that could be a whole other issue to go back to.
Absolutely.
I was trying to think of some of my other thoughts as I was going through it. I'm still interested in the age aspect, like that's so interesting, and it's almost like as the surveys come in, it might be interesting to see how they're responding differently by age groups, right? Like to sort of really get at, are we seeing the oldest people also as maybe as the most inclusive?
Yeah.
What about those ones that are younger than 65? How are they responding? That's so interesting.
Well, I wondered if the older ones just felt safe, like they were kind of already sailed on this boat. They didn't have any real fear of like, I've lived my life.
Oh, come on.
And maybe the younger ones,
I'm not ready to die yet.
feel a little more, listen, if you're in your 60s, there ain't no way, Lamont, there ain't no way. So I just feel like, I don't know, that was just a thought.
And I
And
I look at these people at 65 and think of the people I worked with and the people in the Methodist church that I knew from
There's maybe some.
the 80s. Yeah, I'm wondering if that
they're all
goes
you
with
and your buddies.
Yeah. And I think about those, and we'd all be in the 65 to 70 range, 60, 70 up there. And it was a very liberal church back then. It was, we had a bishop out of Kansas whose two sons were gay and died of AIDS. And back then, that's what we were dealing with, was we didn't know what AIDS was.
Right.
And so we had the AIDS quilt on campus. I brought that on when I was there. And we did a lot of that kind of advocacy stuff. So back before the Good News Methodists got control of the conferences, it was an entirely different church. So that number doesn't surprise me at all.
That makes sense.
Because
I appreciate that insight, yeah.
I think that's probably the Methodists that were in it back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when it was the liberal church around.
Mhm.
It was the one that all the hippies went to.
For sure, yeah, you can see them marching on Selma, and you see the pastors out there.
It also kind of lines up with the social movement literature, which says who has so I know these people are saying they're inclusive. How much activism they're doing is another question. But if we look at the social movement literature, there's an area called biographical availability, and it basically says for a long time it was students. I think that's changed. Like, okay, so the people who were most inclined to get involved in social movements and activism were students, and people like, you know, retirees, people who are 65 plus, that kind of thing. And the idea is a couple different things. They say family ties no longer bind them, so maybe that's a strange way to call it, but you don't have little kids at home and you're not in the midst of your career, you just don't have many, maybe perhaps responsibilities. I'd say it's changing with our students, because our students now, they just work when they're not at school. So, I mean, maybe at certain liberal arts colleges, they're activists, but I mean, I feel like our students, they don't have the bandwidth bandwidth or time to take it on. But, well, and that would be sort of like an interesting idea. Like, I mean, for the inclusive ones too, like, are they the ones that are maybe passing the petitions, spreading the words, saying we need to gather and hold signs? It would be interesting to know if they're almost taking on more of the work too, like.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and another thing I thought about with the age, if you look at the age group now, so look at, you know, college, late high school, let's just say 16 to 25, their involvement in community organization looks very different.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of it is done on platforms, on applications, on their smart devices. You know, and also the decline in church attendance. I just saw a Pew Research graph on it that came up on NPR. It's at a steady decline. I mean, people are just not going to church.
Yeah.
And that was and that's another question we have with this, is it because the church is racist, sexist, and homophobic? You know, I mean, that's a question. I think that's plausible.
But we saw the decline back in the 80s in the Methodist Church. We saw the decline in that. And of course, most of the colleges that the Methodists supported were liberal arts colleges, which made them a little bit different too. But we were seeing a decline in all Christian denominations pretty much steadily in the 80s until the evangelicals took off.
Yeah.
And that is the only group. And at that time, of course, the only other group were the twinkle bunnies that were taken off. So, you know.
How do you capture, for lack of a better word, like nuance, like people who leave the church not specifically because they're concerned about inclusivity, but, you know, they lost a passion for it, it stopped being convenient, and also they're not real pleased about these policies. Like, it's kind of both, where like if they were more actively engaged in the church, they would have stayed. But then, you know, when you kind of want to do something and then you almost like look for more reasons sometimes, like if it was already bothering them, like, what do you do when you can't pinpoint the reason, right? Where they stayed for years and it bothered them, but then their kids started playing soccer on Sundays or something. And so it was like the final push was like, you know what, we were kind of feeling this way for a while, or we're kind of getting lukewarm on the church, and also it's not convenient anymore. We moved far away or something. How do you capture that?
Well, if they have to be included in the interviews, right? And I think there's a question we ask. We obviously ask, why are you staying? Have you considered leaving? And one of the very first questions I ask is, tell me a little bit about yourself. This is on the IRB. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your connection to United Methodist Church. And so they kind of give me that background. And then at that point, we ask them, why are you, how involved are you with the LGBTQ plus inclusivity situation? Can you elaborate a little bit on your position on that? And it's usually in that conversation, they'll say, well, we haven't had this, but I guess they would say something along the lines of, well, I really wasn't quite as invested in that originally, but it was the tip of the iceberg for me because I was already unhappy. I would guess that would be where they would give that information. But honestly, with the Qualtrics survey, it pretty much black and white told you. I wish I had a list of the questions. I apologize. That it pretty much exited you out if you said you were not invested in LGBTQ plus, you were exited from them. So you had to pretty much have a reason. Now, I would guess if you wanted to be a part of the interview, you would have kind of said, I'm gonna go ahead and put that down so I can talk further with them. Yeah. But I haven't had any yet that said that was the tip of the iceberg for me. pretty much everybody that we've interviewed, I think, like I said, it's about 71. This one was done when we had only like accomplished, I think, maybe like 38. So obviously these numbers are going to change, right? As far as like the median, well, the median age isn't going to change, but as far as like some of these themes that we're seeing, we're going to have probably additional themes. But yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. That's helpful.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? What's your name?
My name is Michael.
Michael, do you have any thoughts or questions?
I just came to learn.
Okay.
See, I'm kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, so it's like it's always good to learn both sides. So
Yeah.
it's very opposite. I go to Park Avenue downtown.
Yeah.
So they're kind of
They disaffiliated.
Yeah, they're kind of one of the flagship leaders on the GNC. So
Yeah.
it's always I just like learning both sides.
Well, and like I love those. Could you, and maybe you could even enlighten us a little bit. Do you know anything as far as the GNC that would be helpful for us to understand?
So the GMC is basically a lot like, there's obviously a lot of differences from the United States. It's not like we just want it the exact same way. Well, there are other things besides just, the LGBTQ stuff that was going on, that there were some money things, the trustee clauses and apportionments and all that stuff. It's a little different now under the GMC, but all the, the rhetoric and all that kind of stuff. It's mostly the same.
I know the GMC is still building.
Yeah,
They're
it's
still trying to
obviously still
create.
brand new. So,
Right.
and, with the vote in 2024 and all that, there's a lot of congregations who are like, United Methodist Church is like, it's all the metro stuff, but then there's a lot of rural, smaller 20-member churches that are still, they might not care as much, or they're just like, we've been doing this way for 200 years, and we're not going to change for nobody. So that kind of thing. So
Thank you,
all
Michael.
that stuff. I just can't learn about it.
I appreciate you being here. Yeah, I saw your children's ministry. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Well, and I hate to call this to a close, but on that, I think we're gonna have to close out, and we hope that you'll come back when you get more in your study.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what
Find
happens.
out. I wanna thank everybody for being here online or face-to-face, and put in a plug for October 26th. Dr. Fitzgerald will be coming and talking to us about comedy. You'll find everything on our website. We will be having a surprise person in November that even this group doesn't know about. I just found out about yesterday. So be looking on our website, and I'll be announcing for early in November a surprise brown bag.
Just close it out.
Otherwise, take care.